This is book number 4, Anastasia Adrift, PNW Affliction series, narrated by yours truly, Mr. Chance Paladin. This is an urban and oceanic survival story. All rights reserved. No portion of this book may be reproduced in any form without permission from the author, except as permitted by U.S. copyright law. This is a work of fiction. Names, characters, businesses, places, events, and incidents are either the product of the author's imagination or used in a fictitious manner. Any resemblance to actual persons, living, dead, or actual events are purely coincidental. Content advisory is as follows. I write post-apocalypse books. Therefore, portions of these stories are intended for mature audiences. Romance level. There is about as much romance as you would expect in a typical post-apocalypse scenario. Explicit sexual acts were included or germane to the story and not intended to be gratuitous or fetishized. There isn't really any hard swearing worse than what you'd hear on cable, and there's a moderate range of violence as would be expected in a post-apocalypse story. However, the suffering aspects are not deliberately glamorized or embellished upon. Forward. I think sooner or later in life everyone's going to feel like they're lost or like they would just like things to hurry up. I think that's either misunderstanding or misreading your senses. I think what's really going on is your body's telling you to pay attention to these exact current moments, telling you to prepare for what's coming next, so that you're as ready as possible for when the next thing comes, because you can't be ready for everything. Chapter 1. Waking Up. Home. Stronghold 8 months after the collapse. Late summer. I wasn't sure how long I'd been asleep, but I awoke to a cat scratching at the door that wouldn't stop. I tried to block it out, but something about the futility of claws on steel that won't quit gets you awake. I opened my eyes and remembered I wasn't in my tiny home on the farm anymore, but a little ways out on the Pacific, in a luxury super yacht. That was dead in the ocean. What was I doing out here again? I couldn't remember, and then I started to drift back off to sleep. Then an alarm started blaring from all directions at once. Chapter 2. To the Ruins. 2 days prior. It was going on 3 months after the Combination Plaza incident. They were fine out at the plaza now, by the way. We trained their security up a bit with the new mindset they had. We also got them some great little goats. They were able to beat the Nettles back. Then they were able to start safely harvesting their food to make whatever they could. The kids could play outside and again and all that. You could say life had gotten back to pretty decent normal for them. We still visit them once a month for training, but it is nice not having to be as concerned about their safety now. With that new peace of mind, we were able to start other projects. The 2 raiders they converted told us of abandoned buildings their group had stashed supplies at near the ocean. These were supplies they had gathered along the way, but weren't able to hold on to, sort of like nomadic looters in a scout group for a larger marauder group. We notified the local zone, we set up a mission, and I got to go. We traveled up to the next zone up right at daybreak after breakfast like we usually did. We only took 2 trucks this time since we didn't need the full group. We were more concerned at this point over the growing risk of our fortified hamlet getting attacked than an ambush. Either scenario was a potentially really bad situation, plus fuel was starting to run a little low. We had some treated fuel and even had been able to reactivate some, but the supply was still low. So the choice was made to only take 2 trucks and leave 4 of ours at home for extra defense. We'd been able to run a properly serialized convoy before, but to be honest, 2 vehicles was usually enough if you stayed the correct distance apart. Only concern was that each vehicle had to have enough room to handle the other if a vehicle went down, so we usually had 2 vehicles covering us, could do basically whatever we needed to do, flank, cover, you name it. Took maybe about 3 hours to get to the next zone's hamlet, zigzagging around the overpasses where we could. We got within radio distance and our comms guy radioed ahead. We received the proper codes back, challenge passwords, etc., so in we went. It was about lunchtime, so we filled them in on the total plan. Mostly the parts we couldn't share over the still few remaining volunteer-operated ham radio repeaters. The guys liked the idea and put together a combined team for a change of pace. We included a few folks from our group, and that was that. The rest would stay behind and help cross-train and make an afternoon of it. Then we had some cross-functional events planned for tomorrow, then we'd head home after lunch. It should be pretty fun. It was scheduled that way so people going on the scouting mission wouldn't miss the cross-training and people staying behind wouldn't miss out on what happened. We alternated who sat in whose truck in order to bond and headed out. We only took 2 trucks to investigate the alleged building, as their zone was no less insulated and thus an equal concern of being raided from the other side. It was simply a different group from the nearby city-state that could potentially raid them is all. So, while we're gone, they would all cross-train on defenses, tactics, and help with the guard duty until we got back. Then, when we got back, there was an event planned, and I couldn't wait. They never told us what the events were, but they had a big empty building set up where they practiced room clearing. That was always a lot of fun for me. Maybe they even had come up with some new threat role-playing scenarios, who knows? It was always a lot of fun to share new threat situations that each of the zones came up with to throw at each other. There had only been one observation of note during the trip. There was an overpass into a brief tunnel which had been overhauled as a defensive position. Underneath the overpass there had been defensive crawl spaces created as well on both sides. It was fairly well concealed and you wouldn't know until it was too late and you'd be driving into a complete kill zone. Probably originally had a vehicle that they would trap people in with, and then the ambush would pop off. Further into the tunnel they had rigged some parachutes that could spring down with people inside, presumably with machine guns, and finish off anyone who tried to come out and create a perimeter. And emplacement in the front looked like it was set up for a squad automatic weapon to direct fire into the engine compartments. Even on most armored vehicles, it was rare to have armored engine compartments. Anything bigger than 5.56 rounds shred enough components to shut down a vehicle within 30 seconds. Pushing that out of my mind, I helped the other zone take detailed notes and pictures and their CO could figure out what to do with it later. It was out of the way of everything, so thankfully it had never been an issue for our side's normal patrols. It was just here presumably to protect their cache and as a forward point and to pull people into ambushes if they ever established themselves. My recommendation to the local team CO was to dismantle the ambush components, but to make sure it didn't compromise the structure prematurely. I know they needed time to think about it, and that was fine. It was a tough thing to think about. I sure didn't expect such an elaborate macabre design here. We swept the area one more time and then took a quick bio break, then proceeded to finish our journey to the ruin that the converts had described to us. Within an hour or so we got to the ruins near the ocean. Chapter 3, The Ruins Search, a few hours ago. The initial search of the ruins revealed no apparent traps, and we had indeed found some loot. The buildings had been largely ignored in the past due to the upper levels being exposed to the elements and not looking safe. However, the upper levels were safe, but slightly radioactive, which was strange. The mercs marked their caches with radioactivity, apparently. Not a heavy dose, but definitely enough to notice with a Geiger counter. We obviously didn't have something obscure like that on hand, so we had to borrow one. So, prior to the mission, had to go to the hub and ask around, return to the hub in 30 days, and voila! From the top of the abandoned building, we saw a ship far off in the distance. We were an inland group, but I asked the local zone if they kept any boats with them. They said there was a dock nearby, but the other side had taken all the boats a long time ago to bolster their already considerable fleet. What the local team did carry with them were inflatable Zodiacs, and they wanted to know why I was asking such a weird question. I emphasized that I wanted to know what the deal with the boat out at sea was, and they said it was a ghost ship. I said, a ghost ship? Like how? I proceeded to get told about the ship by 2 of the guys from the local zone. They said the story goes like this. The Pacific Northwest Local Tourist Organization used to have 4 ships, and one day all 4 were lost at sea. They were ships that used to tour people around all the islands, like tour yachts, basically. Well, right around when the collapse happened, there was a big tropical depression. You see? Well, you know. His friend interjected, the Pacific Northwest doesn't get hurricanes, they get tropical storms. Right, I said, having lived here my entire life and thus already knew this anecdotal fact. I tried not to sound annoyed, though. Anyway, the original gentleman continued with the story. So people were outdoors and still trying to go to work during the storm. They were trying to pretend like nothing was going on, even though there had been some weird brownouts and the protests all seemed to be getting worse. But then the storm came. These 4 luxury yachts were lost at sea, who knows where, presumably destroyed. The other man interjected again in almost a contradictory manner, mumbling, "Nothing around here natural could have destroyed those ships."